My older brother sent that text on a Tuesday night. I remember because I was in the middle of reheating leftover pasta when my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. The group chat was called Family Hom Warn. My mom had named it 3 years ago, back when things still felt like they could be fixed. The message said, "Don't bother coming to Dad's retirement party. Bridget thinks it'll be awkward with you there. You know how things get." I set my fork down. Below it, within seconds, my mom sent a thumbs up emoji. Then my dad sent one too. I stood in my kitchen for probably 2 full minutes just staring at that screen. The pasta went cold. I typed back one word, "Understood," and then I put the phone face down on the counter and finished eating in the dark. That was the whole thing. No phone call. No explanation. No sorry sis, but just a Tuesday night text telling me I was too much of a problem to be in the same room as my own father on one of the biggest days of his life. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. My older brother's name is Owen. He's 4 years older than me, which made him 11 when I was 7, and that gap was everything when we were kids. Owen was the one who got my dad's sense of humor and my mom's easy confidence. He walked into rooms and people just liked him. Teachers called him a natural leader. Coaches put him in starting positions. My parents talked about him at dinner the way people talk about someone they're genuinely proud of, freely, happily, without having to work at it. I was the other one. I wasn't bad at school. I wasn't in trouble. I just wasn't Owen, and in our house, that distinction mattered more than anyone would ever admit out loud. I got decent grades and my mom would say, "That's nice, honey," and then mention that Owen had made varsity. I got a part-time job at 16 and my dad nodded and said good, responsibility, and then asked Owen what his plans were for the weekend. It wasn't cruelty, it was something almost worse. It was just the natural order of things, the way water finds its level. Owen was the center. I orbited. When I was 22, I got a job offer in Atlanta. Entry-level project coordinator at a hospitality management company. I'd studied business administration, done 2 internships, applied to 47 positions in 8 months. The Atlanta job was not glamorous. It paid $38,000 a year, and I was going to share an apartment with a stranger from Craigslist. But it was mine, and when I told my parents, my dad said Atlanta's far, and my mom said, "What does Owen think?" I moved anyway. The next 6 years are the part of the story that I lived alone, no audience. No one watching or cheering or even paying much attention. I worked, I made mistakes, I got better. I took a second job on weekends doing event logistics for a local catering company, and I learned more in 2 years of that than I did in 4 years of school. I learned how hotels actually run. I learned how margins work in event planning, how to negotiate vendor contracts, how to read a room and reroute a disaster before the client notices it's happening. By 26, I was a regional events coordinator. By 26, I was a regional events coordinator. By 28, I was managing a portfolio of corporate accounts. By 30, I had enough saved to go in as a minority partner on a boutique hotel property in Savannah with 2 other investors. It was a 14-room place, an old converted Victorian, and we were all terrified, and it worked. I didn't tell my family any of this in real time. Not because I was hiding it. I just stopped volunteering information to people who didn't ask, and they didn't ask. Owen bought a house in our hometown at 28 with help from my parents for the down payment. That was the story at Thanksgiving that year. That was the thing we talked about for 3 hours. I went home twice a year. I smiled. I helped with dishes. I drove home to my apartment and I was fine. Then Owen met Bridget. I want to be careful here because I don't think Bridget is a villain in any clean, satisfying sense. She's not evil. She's something more ordinary than that. She's a woman who decided very early that she was the most important person in any room, and she found in Owen a man who completely agreed with her. They made each other worse in that specific way some couples do, where each one gives the other permission to be their worst self. The first time I met her was at Easter, 2 years before the retirement party text. She asked me 3 times what I did for work, and each time I answered, she nodded the way people nod when they're not listening, and then pivoted back to something about herself. At dinner, she interrupted my dad's story to tell a longer story. Owen watched her like she was doing something impressive. After dinner, my mom pulled me into the kitchen and said quietly, Bridget is very driven. She has strong opinions about family. I didn't know what that meant yet. I found out gradually. Bridget had opinions about where holiday dinners should be held. Her parents' house, starting Christmas the year they got engaged. She had opinions about money. Owen should be making more, and if he wasn't, it was because he wasn't being supported correctly by the people around him. She had opinions about me, specifically. I was distant. I was independent in a way that read as cold. I didn't make enough effort. Owen started saying the same things Bridget said, in slightly different words. That was how I knew she had gotten all the way in. Last spring, my dad announced his retirement. 31 years as a high school history teacher. He wanted a party, nothing huge, just family and close friends at a venue, dinner, maybe some speeches. He seemed genuinely excited about it, in a way my dad didn't always let himself be excited about things. I said I would come. I bought a flight. I started thinking about what to say if they asked me to give a toast. 3 weeks before the party, the text came. Don't bother coming to Dad's retirement party. Bridget thinks it'll be awkward with you there. I didn't call Owen. I didn't call my mom. I said my one word and I went to sleep. And in the morning, I canceled my flight and I got a partial refund and I went to work. What my family did not know, what I had not told them, because they had not asked in 6 years, was that the company I worked for had, 18 months earlier, acquired a small events venue in their city. Not a hotel. A dedicated event space, a renovated industrial building, exposed brick, high ceilings, capacity for up to 200 people. We had rebranded it and spent 8 months getting it right. I was the one who had managed the acquisition. My name was not on the marquee, but I was part of the ownership group, and I was the person who had sourced the property, negotiated the lease, and overseen the build-out. My parents had booked their retirement party there. I found out when my assistant forwarded me the booking confirmation 2 days after the text. The name on the reservation was my dad's. The contact for logistics was Bridget. I read the email 3 times. My assistant, a 24-year-old named Faye who had worked with me for almost 2 years and who knew, in the vague way assistants know things, that my family situation was complicated. She looked up from her desk and said, "Everything okay?" I said yes. I said it was fine. Then I asked her to pull the file and I looked at the venue floor plan they'd selected, the catering package they'd chosen, the timeline for the evening. It was a good event. Whoever had planned it, probably Bridget, had decent taste. The layout made sense. The menu was appropriate for the guest count. I closed the file and went back to my other work. For a week I went back and forth. The honest version is that I thought about canceling their booking. I have the right to refuse service for any number of reasons, and I have a team that handles these conversations. It would have been easy and it would have been, in some very specific emotional sense, satisfying for about 48 hours and then it would have felt small. So I didn't do that. What I did do was show up. Not to the party, not as a guest. I showed up the morning of the event to walk through the venue with my operations manager, the way I sometimes do for bookings I want to make sure go well. I was there professionally. I was wearing what I always wear to site visits. Dark trousers, a blazer, my hair pulled back. I had a clipboard, though honestly I rarely use it. It just gives your hands something to do. I was in the main hall checking on the table arrangements when I heard the front door open. Owen and Bridget came in 2 hours before the event's start time. This is not unusual. Family members often want to walk the space, add personal touches, check that things look right. Our venue coordinator, a calm and competent woman named Sylvia, greeted them at the door and walked them in. Bridget was talking before she fully entered the room. Something about the centerpieces, were they the ones she'd specified? Because in the photos they looked slightly different. Owen was nodding along with his hands in his pockets. I was standing 12 feet away. Bridget saw me first. I watched the recognition move across her face in stages. First the neutral, polite expression she would give a stranger. Then a flicker of something that tried to be confusion. Then the full rearrangement of her features into something I can only describe as a person realizing they have made a significant error in a situation they cannot immediately assess. She said my name. It came out strange, like a question she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Owen looked up. I said hello to both of them. My voice was completely normal. I have spent a long time learning how to make my voice completely normal. Owen said, "What are you doing here?" I said I was doing a walkthrough. I said I try to be on site for larger events when I can. He said, "You work here?" I said, "Not exactly." I said I'm part of the ownership group. I said we acquired this property about 18 months ago and I oversee our events portfolio in this region. Bridget made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Owen's face went through something I hadn't seen before. I've seen him embarrassed. I've seen him caught in something and trying to talk his way out. This was different. This was the specific expression of a person recalibrating something they thought they understood completely and finding that the whole frame was wrong. He said, "You own this place?" I said, "It's a partial ownership stake." I said, "The company structure is a little complicated." I said, "What matters is that everything is set for tonight and it's going to be a really nice event for Dad." Bridget said, "Why didn't you say anything?" I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the text. I thought about the thumbs up emojis, 2 of them, from my parents. I thought about Easter dinner and 3 questions she didn't listen to the answers of. I said, "Nobody asked." Sylvia, to her enormous credit, stepped in smoothly and asked Bridget if she wanted to look at the centerpieces now. Bridget followed her, and I could see from the set of Bridget's shoulders that she was recalculating furiously, trying to figure out what this meant and what it changed and how she was supposed to behave now. Owen stayed. We stood in the middle of the main hall, the 2 of us, with the round tables set around us and the afternoon light coming through the high windows. He looked older than I expected, which is a strange thing to notice about someone you grew up with. He had lines around his eyes. He looked tired in a way that wasn't just the day. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "I'm sorry about the text." He paused. That was, Bridget thought I said, "I know what Bridget thought." I said, "I know what Bridget thought." I said it gently, not sharply. There was no point in being sharp. I just need you to know that it wasn't okay. You wrote it. It came from your phone. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "You should be here tonight, as a guest." I said I'd think about it. I wasn't being coy. I genuinely hadn't decided. What happened next is the part of the story I find hardest to tell, not because it's dramatic, but because it's complicated in a way that drama doesn't really capture. I went back to my office. I called my dad. I had not planned to call him. I don't know exactly what made me do it. Something about standing in that hall. Something about the lines around Owen's eyes. Something about a man who spent 31 years teaching other people's children history and was retiring quietly without probably ever having understood that he had 2 children and he had really only raised one of them. My dad picked up on the second ring. He said my name like he was glad to hear from me, which is the thing about my dad. He was always glad to hear from me. He just never did anything about it. I said, "I know about the text. I know what Owen sent me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother and I thought it might be easier." I said, "Dad." I said it the way you say someone's name when you want them to stop and actually hear the next thing. "I'm not calling to argue. I'm calling because I want you to know that I'm proud of you. 31 years is a long time, and you were good at it, and I'm sorry that I let things get to a place where your own kid isn't supposed to come to your retirement party." He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Can you come tonight?" I said, "Can you come tonight?" I said yes. I went home and changed into something nicer than the blazer. I drove back to the venue that evening and I walked in through the front entrance with the other guests, and my dad saw me from across the room and he crossed it without stopping to talk to anyone, which is not something my dad does. And he hugged me in the way that fathers hug daughters when they have run out of words and are trying to use their body to say all of them. My mom cried. I had not anticipated my mom crying, but she did, quietly with her hand over her mouth, the way women of her generation cry when they have been caught being wrong. Bridget spent most of the evening on the other side of the room. I noticed, but I didn't mind. There are versions of this story where Bridget becomes a changed person over the course of one dinner, and this is not that version. What happened is that she was civil and distant, which is honestly better than I had hoped for. Owen gave a toast for my dad that was genuinely good. I don't know if it was Bridget's influence or despite it, but he talked about our dad in a way that was specific and loving. about a particular afternoon when he was 8 years old, and our dad drove an hour each way to find a book Owen needed for a school project. Our dad standing in that bookstore, Owen said, was the first time he realized his dad thought he was worth the effort. I sat with that for a while. After dinner, when the guests had thinned out and the venue staff were beginning the quiet process of clearing up, my dad found me by the bar. He had a glass of water and that particular look he gets when he's been thinking about something and has decided to say it. He said, "I didn't know what you've been doing all this time." I said, "You never asked." He nodded slowly. He said, "That's on me." I said, "Yeah, some of it is." He said, "Are you okay? Are you happy?" And I thought about my apartment in Atlanta and Savannah and the boutique hotel that was mine in the way that very few things had ever been mine. I thought about Faye forwarding me that booking confirmation and the week I'd spent deciding what to do about it and what it meant that I chose to show up rather than walk away. I said, "Yeah, Dad, I'm really good." He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. We stood there for a minute watching the last guests trickle toward the door, and it wasn't fixed. I want to be clear about that. One dinner doesn't fix 6 years of not asking. One hug across a room doesn't undo the Tuesday night text, or the thumbs up emojis, or the 31 years of being the orbit to Owen's center. But it was something. It was my dad standing in a venue I helped build, learning for the first time who his daughter actually was. I drove home that night with the windows down despite the cold. I had an early call the next morning, a new property we were considering in Charleston, and I was genuinely excited about it in the way I'm always excited at the beginning of something new. My phone buzzed at a red light. I glanced down. It was Owen. A text. Just 3 words. I didn't know. I put the phone in the cup holder. The light turned green. I know, I thought. That was always the thing. You never knew because you never looked. I drove home. I made tea. I went to bed early and I slept without my phone on the nightstand for the first time in a long time, and in the morning I woke up and I went back to building the things that were mine. I've thought a lot about what it actually means to be unseen by the people who are supposed to know you best, not ignored in a dramatic, cruel way. Just looked past. Like a piece of furniture in a room someone walks through every day without really registering. It's there. That was me and my family for most of my life. And for a long time I told myself it didn't matter, because I was building something real and quiet and mine, and that would be enough. Some days it was, some days it wasn't. But I kept going anyway because the only alternative was to stop, and stopping never made sense to me. What happened with Owen and Bridget at the venue? That whole moment, the recognition moving across her face, his voice going flat when he said, "You own this place?" I won't pretend it didn't feel like something. It did. But it wasn't the vindication I might have wanted at 22, standing in my parents' kitchen feeling invisible. It was something quieter. It was just the truth arriving in a room, on its own schedule, without me having to drag it there. And that's the thing I keep coming back to. I didn't engineer that moment. I didn't maneuver anyone into it. I showed up to do my job, the way I've showed up to do my job for 6 years. The moment happened because I had spent 6 years becoming someone, and eventually the world gets small enough that the people who didn't bother to look up run right into what they missed. That's not fate, that's not luck, that's just math. When you put your head down and do honest work, the work accumulates. When you make decisions based on what's actually right, not what's easiest, not what keeps the peace, not what other people expect, your life starts to reflect those decisions. It doesn't happen fast. It doesn't announce itself, but it compounds, the same way neglect compounds, the same way enabling someone compounds. Owen spent years nodding along while Bridget made herself the center of every room. I spent those same years building things. By the time we ended up in the same room again, we were standing on completely different ground. I want to be honest about my dad too, because he's the part of this I find hardest to resolve. He's not a bad man. He loved me the way some parents love the child they understand less. Distantly, with good intentions and not enough effort. Our phone call the day of the party, the hug across the room, his hand on my shoulder at the end of the night, those things were real. They mattered. But I also know that one dinner doesn't rebuild 6 years of not asking. That's not bitterness. That's just being clear-eyed about what things cost and what it takes to repair them. Integrity means being honest about that too, not letting one good moment erase the pattern, but also not letting the pattern erase the moment. What I know is this. I drove home with the windows down. I had an early call the next morning about something new, and I was genuinely excited. That feeling, the quiet, forward-facing excitement of someone who likes what they're building. That's the whole thing. That's what 6 years of invisible work actually buys you. Not a moment where someone finally sees you. Just a life you don't need them to validate. Faye asked me the next day if everything had gone okay. I said yes. She nodded and went back to her desk. It really was.